just about to push record now. Okay, wonderful. Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us to learn all about how we manage excellent behaviour at St Peter's, and I'm hoping you can all see the screen and the PowerPoint in front of you. Just a quick bit of housekeeping so you know, we're aiming to take no more than 45 minutes of your time today. We have had some technical problems with Teams over the last week. We were able to run a successful session yesterday, so I'm hopeful that it will all be fine. But if there are any technical problems, we will also follow this up regardless with the PDF of all the slides and a recording of the session, which will be accessible to all of you. So thank you for joining us, and we'll take you through it. So we're going to talk today about the 5 pillars of excellent behaviour. Miss Napier is going to talk to us a bit about where that comes from and the research that informs it. I know that you'll already be familiar with the school rules on the screen: be ready, be safe, and be respectful. And they're nothing new this academic year. In fact, they were introduced 2 academic years ago. And that was when we first started our journey to changing and adjusting to a new process of how we manage behaviour at St Peter's. And then obviously we had COVID, and things changed quite a lot on the ground in terms of how we manage everything, behaviour included as part of that. So what we're going to talk to you today is similar to this, what we shared with staff when we relaunched in September this year. It's not a complete change at all. We've made some minor changes to how we were already doing things. We've improved, we've reflected on what we were doing really, really well. We've challenged ourselves on some of the things that we could do even better. And we're confident that we've got a really brilliant system in place that we can continue to build on and be even better than we already are. Just share with you the Ofsted quote there from 2019 about how exceptionally well behaved children are at St Peter's. And I know that that won't come as any surprise to you, but children come with challenge, and we're ready for that. And we've got strong processes to be able to help support and help children to grow and to learn and to become excellent global citizens as a result. So I'll pass over to Miss Napier, who's going to talk to you about where this all comes from.
Yes, so as always, the things that we do at St Peter's are based on research, and the work by Paul Dix in particular has been really, really key in helping us think about our approach and how we make it work and how we make it work for us at St Peter's. So the book, When the Adults Change, Everything Changes, has really made a seismic shift in our thinking, as Miss Hughes was saying 2 years ago. So really this is an introduction to our relaunch of the behaviour, and it's a chance for us to share as we go along some bits of the research that we've used to help us as we relaunch our behaviour policy. Obviously, as we're recording, it's not going to be the place for questions about individual behaviour, so questions naming individual children and things. Please just go through the usual routes, inquiry desk, so that we can help you with those. But if you do have thoughts or comments on our overall approach, on the research, then please do pop them in the chat as we go, and we'll endeavour to pick those up as we go along, because we know that feedback is really, really important. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You're going to hear from 4 members of staff, Miss Napier, myself, Mrs Ashman and Mrs Wilmot at various times as we go through. And we're just going to talk about how this research has shaped our vision for behaviour at St Peter's. So one of the key things that Pivotal Education and Paul Dix talk about all the way through both of their texts are about these 5 pillars. And they are first, attention to best conduct, calm and consistent adult behaviour, relentless routines, scripting interventions, and restorative conversations. We're going to take you through each one of those and just give you a little bit of detail about what that means, and hopefully you'll start to build up a picture of what that looks like at school. I'm just conscious that there might be things that pop into the chat bar, so Mrs Ashman, are you okay to man that as we go, and then perhaps if we don't need to address it immediately, we could do it at the end as well. Okay, so the first thing that I'd like to just get across is why we're doing what we do. And the absolute priority is that we can give children relational paths out of difficult events. And that's what Paul Dix talks about. It's about helping children readjust so that when these challenging circumstances happen, they can consider how they can navigate through it. And that's what we're aiming for, isn't it? With challenging behaviour, it's to be able to make it so that children can make better decisions in the future. Ultimately, when something's going wrong, it's going wrong. We want to offer that opportunity so children can readjust and build on things when they do, so that they improve over time. Essentially, we hope to end up with this: pupils get what they need, not just what they deserve. Of course, there are times when there are consequences, and that absolutely is part of what we do, and that is an important part of managing behaviour. But importantly, sitting alongside that is that we support children to help them grow and to develop and to improve. So like I said, hopefully meaning that they can improve those behaviours. And I think that that's a really good one to just keep in your mind. Pupils get what they need, not just what they deserve. Okay, so that first pillar of excellent behaviour here is a first attention to best conduct. And that ultimately really means that we praise the behaviour we want to see in a hope that it becomes part of our culture, and then it increases the amount that we see across the school lessons around the building. I'll just share a few images with you. It's quite amusing what happens if you Google excellent behaviour and some things come up. One thing that comes up straight away is hands up. And I'm sure that most of you, just like me, when you're at school, were told to put your hand up when you wanted to ask a question. And that would have been an example of really good behaviour in the classroom. And actually, you might think that if you were to come into St. Peter's, that would be what you would see, children with their hands up to ask the questions. But actually, some of you will know that that's not what we do. We have a no hands up policy, actually, in our lessons. We call on children using random selections, and we use a lot of talk partners in the hope that it opens up the learning to more children in the class. So actually, if you were to see children with their hands up, probably wouldn't be following the processes that we know we use really, really well. We do use hands up for something else, and I will let Miss Napier explain about that later. But it's just good to know that actually what traditional excellent behaviour, what you might think it might look like, actually sometimes is a bit different. Obviously, it's that age-old thing in education of happy faces and sad faces, and actually we've thought really carefully about what messages we're giving to children visually. We're looking for that first attention to best conduct, and actually that means not necessarily drawing attention publicly to negative behaviours. And one of the things that you'll know about across the school if you've got children in different year groups is that we've had some inconsistent systems of visual behaviours before. So we had the rocket in upper key stage 2, the balloon, and various smiley faces with pegs in lower down the school. And what we have done is we've relaunched that, so we've got a consistent system across the school which focuses on praising the positive behaviours we want to see, and not basically naming and shaming children in front of their peers, which is a really positive change, I think. Another thing that you might have remembered from your times at school, perhaps, I hope not many of you, but I certainly had to write a few lines in my time. When you didn't follow the rules, here's your punishment, writing lines. And obviously, we don't do that at St. Peter's either. What we do is restorative conversations, and we're going to tell you a bit more about that because we think it's impactful and helps shape that change. Okay, so I just talked about moving away from the rocket and the balloon, and I hope that some children have been talking to you about the St. Peter's keys for behaviour. You'll recognise the keys from our logo anyway, but we've got these wonderful new keys. They're in all the classrooms, all the way from reception through to year 6. So we've got a really beautiful visual consistency across every single class and year group. And that means that children are really familiar and they'll be used to those systems as they move throughout the whole school. All children start the day on bronze. They have a peg that goes on that bronze key. And when they're doing behaviours that are really positive and it's what the teachers want to see, can be in the classroom, outside the classroom, they have an opportunity to move up to silver and then to gold. And the ambition being that across the day, most children will have an opportunity to show 2 really positive behaviours that can be celebrated. We're aiming to have that. It doesn't mean that there aren't some challenging behaviours that we will deal with in other ways. What it does mean is that we don't name and shame visually at the front of the class against those children. And what's really important to know is that when you move up a key, you don't move back down. So it's not a case of, you've done something really brilliantly actually, but you've done something again later that wasn't the behaviour you want to see, so you move back down to bronze. Those behaviours that aren't the desirable behaviours don't mean that those good behaviours don't count, and that's really, really important. And that is a bit of a shift in thinking for us as adults. It's a different dynamic, isn't it? That we're saying that negative behaviour doesn't mean that positive behaviour stops being important, and it's really, really, really important for us that we focus on celebrating and praising that behaviour we want to see. We call it first attention to best conduct. You'll notice those words at the bottom, the rip and the pip. So we're just shortened versions of what we say is reprimanding in private and praising in public. So as much as possible, we try and make sure that we, and again, Miss Napier will talk a bit about dignity later on, but when there are behaviours that we need to change and adjust, we try and do that as much as possible, not in front of other children. Obviously, there are times when we have to be careful and tactful, and we do. But we talk about if we need to have those conversations, if we need to have an honest conversation, say, look, actually, this is what I saw happening, and actually, you need to be doing something different instead. We do that away from people as much as possible, so give that child that time. And we focus on praising the behaviours we want to see. So that's not a completely new system, because like I said, we had the rocket and the balloons before. This is just a slightly adjusted system and a real positive in celebrating all of those excellent behaviours. You'll be familiar with our policies on the website. So the behaviour policy for St Peter's is available, and that was updated a couple of years ago. In fact, it's checked every year and goes through governors every year, but it was updated a few years ago to reflect our new learning from our research. So most of what was already in there really reflects what we're continuing to do, because like I said, it's a relaunch, it's not a complete overhaul. However, we have changed the graphic, which is our behaviour flowchart, to make it much more in line with that praising that behaviour that we want to see. We hope that this offers a shared vision for all staff across St Peter's, whether they are lunch staff, which we're working really, really closely with, sports staff or head teacher, whoever it is. We've got this consistent behaviour. We've got a supportive system, and it's really consistently managed. And, you know, phase leaders are really, really crucial in helping us make sure that consistency across the school. So lots of leaders working together on it. Obviously, there are times when things go wrong. I talked about that. Not just getting the behaviours that they need, but not just getting what they deserve, but also what they need, sorry. And this is embedded in our flowchart here. I won't talk about the individual parts because it will become clearer as we move through. But just to reassure that, look, when we do have that problematic high-level behaviour, it is very rare at St Peter's, but occasionally it does happen. We still have all of those statutory processes that we would move through. That's still there, but hopefully we shape behaviour as much as possible to avoid us getting to that point. Okay, so in terms of what you might expect to see at home or hear about, hopefully, and maybe you can ask your children what you're seeing, what they're getting at school. Hopefully, you're hearing about those relational rewards. So one of the things that the research talks about is actually not giving monetary gifts and things of value to children, such as stickers, for example, or small toys when they've done a really, really good job. It's about really making sure they know and giving them that praise. Paul Dix talked about the power of sharing that excellent behaviour with parents, because actually that's what children really, really value. They value us working in partnership and you hearing about all those amazing things that they do. So hopefully you'll see more positive notes home, and we've got our behaviour cards. And I hold it up, but I'm not sure you can see me whilst the PowerPoint's on, but we've got our behaviour cards that say be ready, be safe, be respectful of school rules, and staff are making a concerted effort to give those out where they see those excellent behaviour, and just put a little note on the back to say what that excellent behaviour is, so that you as parents are getting that feedback. We're picking up the phone more so that we can let you know where that excellent behaviour is happening, and you can have that conversation. I mean, we've got 630 children at this school, and much as I'd love that we call every single one, it's not necessarily possible, but we are making an effort to make sure that we do that more than we did before. We know that that makes a difference. We know that these conversations and that verbal praise with children is really, really helping. But it's not without its challenge, because there are learned behaviours as well, and as teachers and member staff in school, we have to change, just like the book said, and we have to make sure that we focus on that positive behaviour more than we are focusing on that negative behaviour. And we've got an obligation to the children to do that too, to celebrate and share that with them as they go along. So it's not without its challenge. It's something that we're working really, really hard on to improve, and I'd like to hear feedback of anyone who's already experienced that with their children at home. Okay, so that's the first pillar, and I'll pass on to Miss Napier to talk about the second pillar.
A really lovely pillar, this one, being calm and consistent in our adult behaviour. So we know this is what we want around school. You will see us modelling it. It's really, really important that we are calm, and in such a large school that we are really, really consistent in our behaviour. We go on to the next slide, Mr. Eustace. Thank you. So one of the things that we focused on to enable us to be consistent is have a visible consistency, things that all staff do. And that isn't just all of the teachers or all of the support staff, that is the sports coaches, that is the SMSAs, that is everybody in school doing the same thing. And that's why we really invested time at the start of this year through Inset and through specific training sessions for every single member of staff who works with children to talk through our behaviour relaunch and to focus on this visible consistency. Because you'll know at home where there are a couple of adults with children, children really thrive when there's consistency. And when there isn't consistency, when there's mixed messages, we end up often with misbehaviour and with confusion. There's a quote from Paul Dix there talking about how children respond when there isn't consistency. And we really take to heart that message that all adults are collectively responsible for behaviour. And that's why you wouldn't see a teacher not caring about what's happening with their children's behaviour at lunchtime or when they're having a PE lesson. We are all working on that together. So when we launched this 2 years ago, it seems like a very long time ago, the visible consistency we tried was shaking hands. And those of you who had children who were in year 2 and above will know that it was really lovely. At the start of the day, we met the children at the door, we shook their hands, we made eye contact and we said good morning. Now, obviously, we had to stop that for a very good reason. However, we have kept the feeling of that, the making eye contact in the morning and being able to greet children by name and expecting that the children are greeting us as well. So that was our first try at a visible consistency that was derailed by circumstances, not because it wasn't particularly working. So we needed to think about a new visible consistency. Now, the one that we selected for term 1, and we may well be continuing it through into term 2, is one that we were using as a school anyway, but as Mr. Eustace said, we realised that we weren't quite as consistent as we could have been in the way that we did it. So we're not putting hands up when children want to answer a question. They're not being asked a multiplication question and putting their hand up. We're using hands up with a countdown to just draw the children, the class's attention when we need them. So they've been discussing with their learning partner. They've been in the hall having their lunch and it's time for the class to stop, put their plates away and go out to lunch. So we will put our hand up as an adult. We will count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It gets the children's attention, but we're not demanding silence. We're giving them chance just to turn their attentions to us. And it has been fantastic, particularly in the dining hall. It's lovely to see the children back there, but our SMSAs are using the countdown just the same way as class teachers were using it. And the children really respond. They're getting so used to our expectations. So that's our visible consistency for term 1. Do ask your children about it because they absolutely will see that. And obviously we're using positive reinforcement as well. So rather than naming publicly children who maybe aren't making the right choice yet, we're positively reinforcing the behaviour that we want to see. We're saying, thank you for looking this way. I can see that you're ready to learn. And the other children around them, maybe who aren't quite ready, will just take that cue and then they'll make themselves ready. Thanks, Mr. Eustace.
Oh, thank you, Miss Napier. So another thing that we know, and it's for adults as much as children, is that we all really thrive when we've got relentless and regular routines. It makes us all feel much safer that we know what's going to come next. It's particularly important for children when they're learning. It's particularly important actually as well for our teachers when they're teaching. If those routines are really embedded, it frees them up to put most of their effort into teaching, which is fantastic. It's also really important to some children who maybe find school life a little bit more challenging, whether that be that they've got a special educational need or behaviour doesn't come quite as naturally to them and it takes a little bit longer to embed, then those routines will really help them settle, get used to school and be ready to learn. We also know, and I'm a parent as well, that getting those routines is really hard. And we can probably all think back to when we first had our babies and you're trying to get them into that bedtime routine and you do that relentless bath, bottle, bed again and again, and it takes so long to get there, but eventually it clicks in and our babies know what to do. And in some ways it's very similar. That's what we're doing in classes at the moment. So we are getting those procedural routines embedded, whether that be this is how we line up, this is how we go into the hall for worship, this is how we put our lunch boxes on the trolleys. So we're really taking the time now so that those routines are embedded, children feel safe, they're secure, they know what's coming next, and our teachers can really then concentrate on teaching. Thank you.
Hi, so you've got me again for a short time, but I promise there are other people who are going to talk as well. So another one of the 5 pillars is about scripting interventions. And we're using these really consistently across the school. And we're using these in the situations, if you can go on to the next slide, Mr. Eustace, thank you. When we've already been drawing attention to best conduct. So as I said, we've noticed the children that are making the right decision, that are showing the behaviour that we want to see. But maybe then a child isn't quite doing it. We might give them a nudge, not a physical nudge, but we might just be giving them some eye contact. We might do a drive-by, just walking past, giving them that reminder that they need to be on task or they need to be following the instructions. But of course, there are going to be times when the behaviour still isn't yet what we expect. And that's when we're going to have a verbal reminder. And if you think back to the flow chart that we had at the start, this is the first circle on that flow chart. We've had all of these positives, but actually, we just need a verbal reminder, and that's really normal. Our children are not automatons. Nobody is perfect. This is just a really important part of our behaviour system. When we're thinking about a verbal reminder, I think it's very, very important that we think about dignity. Dignity is important in so many ways. It's about, as Mr. Eustace said, it's about that private, reprimanding in private. And I love that quote from Paul Dix. If every child matters, which of course they do, they deserve the private and individual and personal interventions wherever possible. I know that in a workplace context, if somebody came, an adult came to tell me I wasn't doing something right in front of other adults, I would be mortified. And I'm not sure it would help me to change my behaviour in the best way. So wherever possible, we are making that a private conversation with children so that they retain dignity. So the example on there is about the names on the board with ticks and crosses. That means that it's everyone's business, and the same when children were moving down a behaviour system. This is about giving children dignity, but also keeping the expectations and making sure they know what we expect of them. So when we have a conversation with a child, initially we're going to use a script. And again, that might seem a bit formulaic. But the reason that we need a script is so that we're consistent as a school. So the conversation or the script I will use with a child in my class when I'm teaching in year 3 will be the same as maybe one of the lunchtime staff will use. It'll be the same as Mr. Eustace uses if he needs to in an interaction with children. The script will be the same, so it's consistent and it's predictable. So the children almost, they know what to expect, and it's fair. Because we know that children are really, really quick to perceive unfairness, whereas actually we're using the same script, we're using the same words. It's fair across the school. And actually, it doesn't affect, as adults, our relationship with the child. We're not cross with them. We're not disappointed in them. We're letting them know what isn't quite right. So, for example, a child might hear something like, the teacher might come over and quietly speak to them. I noticed that you're fiddling with your equipment. I need you to keep your focus on the learning. Remember when you moved up the keys earlier this morning? Thank you for listening. As simple as that, we're letting the child change their behaviour and we're moving away and we can get on with our amazing teaching and learning. So it's really straightforward, but that consistency is absolutely key. Thank you.
Thanks, Mrs. Wilmot. I think you'll need to unmute.
Indeed, I will.
Thank
Thank
you
you very much, Mr. Eustace. Okay, so moving on to restorative conversations. So these form a really pivotal part on helping children to modify their behaviour. They'll be used at a point when the children have received lots of positive praise. We've done our drive-bys, our reminders. We've used the script that Miss Napier was just talking about. If I've noticed, I've needed you to. They might have even had a little bit of thinking time, and yet they're still struggling to modify their behaviour. That's the point at which we will embark on a restorative conversation to help support them in the way forward. If I could have the next slide then, please. So these are based around 5 questions. Again, we do have a lot of things that are really consistent, like the scripts we've used. And again, these 5 questions for our restorative conversations are the same for all staff. We carry them in our lanyards so that from our SMSAs right the way through to LSAs, TAs, teachers, we all have exactly the same 5 questions. Now, these form the basis for a restorative conversation, and staff can use the essence of each question. They may reword it, because obviously a year 6 child is going to be able to process language that's quite different to a child in reception or year 1, but we stick to the essence of the question even if we reworded them, because they take the children through a really sequenced thought process that really helps them to modify and learn from their behaviour and enable them to make some changes and what they're going to do differently next time. So it's really important to know what this kind of conversation looks like. It's a calm conversation, so the child will be taken away. So again, that we're having that private conversation with the child about their behaviour. It's not a public thing. It will be held with the adults that the behaviour has happened with, and that is really key, because we're really keen on building those relationships between adults and children. So it's really important that if the behaviour has happened with a particular adult, that restorative conversation happens with them, so that they will know how to modify their behaviour with them next time. So it's a calm conversation, it's a fair conversation, it's also a balanced two-way conversation. So it's certainly not an interview, it's a reflection. So we will be expecting the children to respond and engage in a conversation around each of the questions, so that we lead them through to that final question of what do we need to do to put things right? How are we going to move forward? What are we going to do next time? So it's really about modifying and helping them to change. So this really fits quite firmly within our behaviour policy in the fact that relationships matter. So through having these restorative conversations, we are really helping to build relationships between children and adults, so that they will be more inclined to want to change their behaviour in the future. We are really strong on behaviour already at St Peter's, and you can see from our SIAMS inspection in 2020, the quote was that behaviour is of the highest standard, relationships are close and harmonious. So we're really just building on what we were already doing well and just making it the best it can be. And our policy is about positive relationships, encouraging and reinforcing behaviour which enables effective learning and fostering a positive attitude. So it really fits in perfectly, having these restorative conversations with building those relationships that we know really matter. So the basis behind positive relationships are not just that it sounds nice and it's a good thing and it makes us all feel happy. There is actually real brain science behind it. So positive relationships, it actually builds motivation. So positive relationships are built on positive interactions. So each of those interactions that you have with a child that's positive has a really powerful effect on the brain, and it motivates them to want to feel that way again. So it kind of activates a really positive hormone in the brain, and they like that feeling. And so when they did that good behavior and they had that praise, it creates a cycle of wanting to do it again. So praise is so pivotal, and it really builds motivation. Building positive relationships and having all those positive interactions with children, it creates a space for learning that feels safe. And we all know that we learn best when we feel safe and we feel secure, and we're not having to think about things that are worrying us. So children are more able to learn when they feel safe. So if you've built up a positive relationship with a child, they're going to feel safe and they're going to be able to learn. And so that's not just their academic learning, that's also about their learning behaviour as well. And finally, the positive relationships, they improve children's behaviour. So the more we develop those conversations when things have gone wrong that have a positive outcome, then they're going to be more inclined to make changes and modify their behaviour. So it's a really strong focus on praising, lots of positive feedback, lots of positive interactions between the adult and the child to build those positive relationships, which are foundational for supporting children with their behaviour. So going to move on to what it looks like, kind of used to look like, and what it should look like. So kind of punishment versus the restorative approach. So those two pictures are really quite nice to show quite how different it looks. So we've got on the left hand side that kind of traditional approach to, you know, things have gone wrong, now I want you to sit there and reflect, but with no interaction. versus our restorative approach, where they're having that reflection time, but through a conversation with an adult who's going to guide them and going to help them in how they can make changes. So I think historically schools were caught up in an idea that every crime has a punishment and that fits it, and all we have to do is find an appropriate punishment for the crime, and then that crime won't happen again. There's an idea that every child might go down a punishment road until they reach a point when they suddenly have a light bulb moment and they think, oh, I'm going to turn my behaviour around and I'm going to suddenly do things different. We know it doesn't really work that way. We need to help children to turn themselves around, not by saying you've got a certain number of chances, but by working with them each time to reflect on their own behaviour in the context. So punishment seeks to manage behaviour, whereas restorative practice seeks to modify behaviour. So what are we trying to restore through these conversations? And these are really key. By having conversation with children, we're restoring that trust between themselves and us. We're also redrawing and restoring the boundaries of what's expected. And also really key is we're giving them a clean sheet. So we've talked through what went wrong, we've dealt with it, we know what to do next, and now that is put aside. We're not going to be reminded of it, we're not going to come back to it. You have a clean sheet and a new start. So that is the essence of what we are achieving through our restorative conversations.
Thank you, Mrs. Wilmot. So I'm bringing up the rear, so to speak, with the logistics and tracking. It's obviously really important that we log and we have a look at any trends that we've got going on with behaviour, and hopefully I'm hoping that your children will have started talking about some of these at home. So we can see that first attention to best conduct. So we've been giving out lots and lots of behaviour cards when we've noticed that children have been behaving in the way that we really want them to. There's those visual rewards of moving up the keys that Mr. Eustace has talked about. And then there's also our merits on class charts. So hopefully you've all got your class chart login. Don't worry if you haven't, we can resend those. But there you can see the rewards that your children have got for their really brilliant behaviour in school, and that's for a whole range of things. Now, at the moment, that's a little bit of a trial and error process. We know that during the partial school closures, teachers use class charts as a way of reinforcing that really positive behaviour that we saw for online learning. It did lead to some discrepancies between how different teachers and different year groups were using it. So at the moment, we're just having a couple of weeks of year groups trying to find what works well for them, and then next week we're coming back together as a school so that we get that consistency as well with how we reward on class charts. But you will get messages from class charts when your children say meet 10 or 20 or 40 or 100 merits. Also, if they're learner of the week, you'll get a message there as well, and we hope that keeps you in touch, because we all know that very often children can't quite remember that they've been given a reward for their really brilliant behaviour. We also have on there, where I've missed it off, is our Hero Award. So we're really looking forward this year to getting back to those, where we can celebrate with families coming in 3 times a year, just to really praise those children who just consistently work brilliantly and their behaviour for learning is fantastic, and that staff nominate because they know that they are just really brilliant. They've tried really hard, but maybe aren't all singing and all dancing, those quiet little plodders that we need to notice as well. In terms of when behaviour doesn't quite go how we want to, our first steps are also recorded on class charts. So if a child needs thinking time, or if a child needs to go to the reflection room, which is on daily, led by an SLT member, that's popped onto class charts as well.
You must remember that.
Oh, sorry. Oh, that's just somebody, sorry. So that's recorded on that as well. You'll be aware that we've got our anti-bullying policy, which sits alongside our behaviour policy. But when an incident is reported to us from a parent or a carer of bullying, we log that onto CPOMS, which is our safeguarding system, and we're able to put a much bigger narrative on that and log those much more closely than we're able to on class charts. And obviously, you know, any report of bullying is a very concerning incident for us that we will investigate fully. In terms of why we spend our time putting behaviour onto these systems, is that it allows us to track, and that's got so many benefits for us. So it allows us to check consistency between staff. So some staff may be giving merits away on class charts to a penny, and then somebody else in the next classroom not so much. So that lets us check that all of those children are getting equal opportunity to have their behaviour rewarded. It also allows us to see any individual children or any groups of children that maybe need a little bit more with support with their behaviour and a bit more input from the adults around school. So that might be a little bit of time with our learning mentor or with Mr. Birchall, or some time with class teachers, just maybe to build those relationships a little bit more to support that really excellent behaviour that we want. We monitor that weekly as a senior leadership team as well. So we come together from our phase leaders, discuss and we look at class charts there. We also share that with our governors on a termly basis, particularly around those bullying incidents, and governors rightly challenge us. You know, if there's been a sudden peak in those being recorded, they'll ask us why, and we unpick all of that with them. The other ways that we monitor the impact of that is through our parent feedback surveys. So you'll remember we had one last term, and that's a really valuable way of getting feedback from you. But most importantly, we also monitor it with our children. So class teachers have really great relationships with their children, so they will be asking them how it feels, how it's going. But we also have things like house captains, and once a year as well, we have our Year 6 pupil survey, where we ask them and we get their feedback, and then that feeds in to our review of our behaviour policy each year. So yeah, not the most exciting of subjects, but actually really important in making sure that we pick up any trends or any children that maybe need that little bit of extra support. Now, that brings us to the end of the presentation. So what I'm going to do is just stop the recording.